Hello everyone, this is Nikita, and this video I wanted to talk about services in PEGA, service REST particularly. We would create a service by creating everything from scratch, like creating the classes, the properties needed, and the service activity, all of these. Okay, so service package we have already covered in the last video. So we would not cover service package in here, but yeah, the service package would already be created and the other things we would create as we go around in this video. So let's get started. Okay, so how do we start? First of all, service package has to be created beforehand before we start creating any service REST. Okay, so let me see if I already have a service package created. Okay. So yes, I already have a service package created, so I can use the same service package and then create my new service REST. So let's create a new service REST. So it would be under integration services. So you would see under integration services, you would see this service REST, right? So we can create a service REST from here. So I want to give a service name. So get book details can be my service package name. So I will use the same service package which I just showed you, test package. Service version is the first version, so we can give URI template is how we want to call this particular service REST. So I can use book. I can also use get book details. It will also work. Let's use the same get book details. Okay. Now let's create it. Okay, so my service REST is already created. Let's go through each of the tabs. Okay, so the first tab is the service tab itself. Here you would see this resource. Resource is basically the class to which this service activity would be invoked. Okay, and then this is the endpoint URL. Basically, this is the URL which would be used by the external application to connect to our service. Okay, so you would see this URI template which we gave at the end. It's appended. Okay, after the version. Right, so this is what it is, and then these are normal default values you can keep, execute synchronously, or you want to queue it, or what would be the service monitoring, all these kind of thing. Now coming to the method, it is very important part. Here you would actually understand what kind of method you want to use depending on the use cases. So it can be a get method, it can be a post method, put method, depending on what kind of method you want to use here, like what is basically you want to do, want your service to do. Get means you based on some particular ID or property, you want to give some details to the other application. So that can be a get use case. There can be a post use case. You can have a multiple properties coming in your payload, and then you want to provide some response to the outer world, to the other application. So depending on the use cases, you can use that. Okay. So we will use, for this particular video, we will use get method. Maybe we will see that if we can have a post method video created separately. But for this particular video, we will stick with get method. Okay. So we will use a get method and see how it works. First of all, what would be the request and what would be the response? So for that, we have to understand our data, right? Like what kind of response we are giving. So we should have some data in our application to give it to the outer world. So for that, we can first create a data type which will hold our values or which will hold our data. So let me start by creating a case data type first. So let me add a data type. Since it's a book details, let me keep it as book. Okay. Let everything be same. Right. So my data type is created. Now I need to create a source. basically what would be the key of my data type and what are the properties or the columns that this data type will contain. So that we have to give it here. For that, I first need to create a property which can be an ID to this data type. So let me create a book ID. Okay, so let me go to this particular class. Now right click and data model and then a property. So I want to create a text property, book ID. Okay, so this would be the primary key for that data type. So I can have it as a text. Let's save it. So it's done, right? So the ID is created. What else can this particular data type should contain? Okay, so I close the data type, right? Let me open. Yeah. So what else this data type should contain, right? That's the question. It can have an ID, that's a primary key. The other thing can be book name, then it can be an author name, it can be the number of pages that the book contains, all those kind of details. Okay, so let me first create some properties pertaining to that. So let me create all of these in data class itself so that it can be reused in my any other data type. So let me first create, okay, data model, property, book name, okay. I'm just creating book name so that it's understood by you all. Normally what we do is we create a reusable property. So I could have used name, right? But to, to make it simpler, to be easily understandable, let's use book name for now. Okay. Similarly, I can have author name. Okay. So this would be some author in that book. This is done. What else there can be? I can have some number of pages, right? So let me create a property, number of pages. And number of pages would be an integer value, right? So let me select it as integer. That's it. So a lot of properties are created already. Let me go to my data type. Now I have to basically give the column names, right? So book ID is already there, so use as key. What else? I just created book name, right? Let me keep it as there, and then I created author name. I can use that, and then I had created number of pages. Okay, so number of pages is integer. So all these are okay. So let me submit it. Then some data pages would be created at the back end, and there would be a table which this data type would be mapped to, or the class would be mapped to. Okay, so this is the column names. So let me first add some value to it. It can be B123, book name can be Atomic Habits, then author name is James Clear. Number of pages, I don't remember. Let's keep it as 300. Okay, so I have my data type all set. You might want to know what is the table name to which it is mapped to. For that, I can just open this class record and test connection. Okay, so I have this table which is mapped to my class, so to my data type class. That's okay. Let me close all of these. What I need right now is I need to create a request class and then a response class. Basically, it will contain the properties which it needs. Okay, so let's take the use case as the outer application would send us a book ID. Okay, and then we would give all the information pertaining to the book ID to the other application. So that would be our use cases. So let's start with creating the request and response. So first we have to create our integration class. So let me do that. Okay, so you see that work class now. Let's not have it in the work class. Let's create a integration class for this. Okay, So it can be into book. Let me create it. Okay, so let's save it. That's it. It would be an abstract class. The created in version. Save it. Give it as book integration class. Okay, saved it. Now this so this is the resource or the class through which it is initiated, the service REST. Now I need to create the request and response class as well. So this would be my base integration class, and then I would create on top of it one request and one response class. So let me start by creating sysadmin, then class. Okay, so basically it should be book and then a request. So that would be my request class. So let's save it. Right, so my request class is created. I would create some property inside this, but for now let's first create the response class as well to make this easy. Okay, so let's just save it. Great. Now coming to the response class, let's just save as this so that a response class also we'll just create it from there. Okay, so this is my response class. Great. So request and response are created. You can see your structure of your response request here. So right now you could see that there is this request and response. There is no property. We have not created any property inside request and response. What is the next step? Next step is I need to have the request and response properties in my main integration class. Okay. So if this is my main integration class, I need to have the request and response properties inside this class, and those properties would reference their request and response classes. I know it's getting a bit confused, so let's create it and understand it. So inside this class, I would create a request property. So create data model and property. Okay. So this is my request property. Request, and it would be a page property. Okay, it would be a page property where I would store my request. Okay. Okay. Where is my request class? My request class is this, right? So let's use this here. Save it. So this is my request property inside the main integration class. Now comes the response property. Okay, inside my main integration class, this is my main integration class. So now I have created my request property already. You can see here the request property is created. Now response property. So inside this, right click, create and property. So this would be my response property, right? So let's create it. Response, and it would again be a page property, and the reference would be the response class which I had created. So this is the response class, right? So this I would use. Okay, let's save it. So now you got my point. What I created in the main integration class, I created two property. One was a request property, then other was a response property, and those were the page property, right? So this page property has to reference some other class. So I created a request and a response classes separately and used it in that property. Okay, got my point? So this is the request property. This is a single page and request class. Response property, single page and response class. This is clear? We can also see it here. Let's go to this. Okay. Now when you go to data model, you would see both request and response, right? Now these are empty right now because inside this classes I did not create any property. So my next step would be creating the properties inside my actual request and response classes. When I create any property inside this, it would be referenced automatically because I have given the reference of those classes in this properties. Okay. So let me create a property first in my request class. So let's right click, data model, property. So since this is like a getting the detail, this service is all about getting the book detail. So we would have the request, in that request we would only get the book ID, and in the response we will have lot of other details which we would send to the other application. So since in the request property, request class, we would add only one property which is book ID. Okay. So this is created. And it would be a text property. So you can save it here. Let's close this. Now coming to the response property. So my response class, right? So my response class, I will also create a property in there. And what would this contain? This would be a list. Okay, so this list would have all the properties related to the book inside this. Okay, so this would be my book list. Let's create it. So this is a page list. Okay, this would be a page list because inside this I would have many properties. So let's make it as page list. Now what would be the page definition? So since this is a page list, this is a page list already, and its page definition would be the data type class, because all the properties which are inside the data type, I would give it as a response to the other application. So let's make it as this. Let's use my data type class, which was data book, this class, and save it. Now I got the idea what I did. Now when I want to see what all the request and response properties are inside this. So let's go to data model, go to property, go to request, and go to response. So now you see what all it contains, right? So it has request class, it contains book ID, then response. A response contains book list, and inside the book list there is a book ID. Why there is only book ID is because my book list, right? So my book list, I am referring it as a book class, but the other properties are residing in the data class. So let me do one thing. Let me delete this and create again. Let me create it again. Inside my response class, create data model property. Okay, so this would be book list. Right, and I've told you what would be the class. First of all, make it as a page list. So it would be till data. I'll not make it till book, okay, because there are some properties which are in data. So it's done. So it would be now inside in book I see two properties, request and response properties. Inside request I see book ID as a property, and inside response I see book list. And again book list will have author name, book name, employee ID, and number of pages. That's what my data type contains, right? So let me check my data type. So my data type has some records and columns: book ID, book name, author name, number of pages. So that's what it is. Now it's done. Now what I have to do is I need to go, let me close all of this first. Okay, let's close. Now I'm in service rest. So it would be a get method, I told you, because I'm getting only the book ID and then sending the responses. Okay, so it's just getting some details, nothing like updating, posting, nothing like that. So it's just getting the details. So let me make it as get book details. So this is a service activity which we need to invoke, right? So let's create this. Okay, so first of all, my service res, what would be the resource class? This would be the main integration class from which everything is invoked. So let's make it as this class, int book. Okay, so my service activity will also be in this class, whatever class I specify in source. Okay, so now let me create this here. So in book, create and open. So what would be the different methods? First of all, I need to create a page new. Okay, some book page, and need to refer this in here. Okay, next I created the book, and what would be the next step? I need to get the request from the service and then browse in our application whether any ID exists or not, and then give the details to the application which is calling. Okay, so now my request page, sorry, my service page which has a request, and it would be book ID. Okay, and then I would need to check it in my application. So let me save it first. Let me save it here. Okay, so my service page, then getting it in the application. What will be the next step? Then we need to browse it. Then we need to browse our application and check whether any ID exists or not, and then get the detail if it exists. So now what would the page name? I need to store it in some page. Let me make it as book list, and I need to define it in my pages and classes also. So book list is a list. So page code PEGA list, and inside this book list I will have several values for the class, main class book. So let's make it like this. Cool. So now we have set up what would be the class. The class is this class in which I am trying to fetch the data from. Okay, there would be any PGINSKey, I haven't created any. Okay, now what we are searching for, we are searching for the book ID should match the book ID which is provided by the request. Okay, so this is the logic which I am looking for. Make it as A. What else do I want from this class? What else value do we need to get? We need to get book name, only value only. We need to get author name, right? Let me get it. Let me select. Okay, what else? Number of pages. Okay, all these are value only. So this is done. What is the next step? What is the next step? We need to, whatever we got from this response, we got some list of values. We need to save it in my response page, right? Let me do that. Property set, and then need to save this book list .px results, whatever we got, to my service page. So I can either make it primary. Primary is also the same service page. Primary dot response, and then what would be it? Book list, because in that I am saving my value. So that's it. I think then we need to remove it. There are some exception handling which we can do. Okay. For exception handling, I will create a separate video because this video will become too big already. So I'll not cover exception handling in here. This is just normal service, how it works. Okay. So I think that's pretty much. Let me save it. Let me see if any error. Okay, what is the error? Okay, my service page should be defined. It's my int class. Okay, let me save it. Okay. Okay, code. I think I gave a wrong spelling. It's code PEGA list. Okay, now saving. What else? It's just saving it. Oh, we are done, I think. Yeah, so this is what the service activity should contain. Let me run it and see if it works or not. First of all, let me see if I have put the request and response properties in my service REST. We need to put it, right? So basically, what is the query string parameter? It is the request dot, we are mapping it from book ID. So this is my request. So let me name it as book ID and map to as clipboard. Okay. And what would be the response? So my response would be JSON, right? So let's make it as JSON, and map from the key would be my response. Then I'm saving it in my book list. Okay. So this is my response. So service REST, all the things we have configured. Now we need to run this and see if it works or not. So first of all, let me see my data type. My data type, what it contained. So it has some values, right? So let's see what it has. It has B123 as a book ID, and then there are some details around it. So let me run this and give value for B123. Okay, so this is a get method. So you need to select the method you are invoking. So let's run it. Oh, great. So what we got is author name as James Clear, book ID, book name, number of pages, cool. So all these were the things which we wanted, right? So that's pretty much. I think this was useful. This would be useful to you because we have created everything from scratch. This was all about get method. We would try to cover the other set of method in my next video after completing all the integration basics. So I think that's it for me in this video. I would love to hear from you about any question, any queries from your side. Do comment on the comment box. I would love to basically answer your question. Thank you all for joining me in here. See you again in my next video. Till then, stay safe. Take care. Bye bye.